This is Jerry Fry, audio historian of Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. The following is the professional history of a PPB member, told by himself in his own fashion on October the 26th, 2015. These interviews are being recorded in order to compile firsthand a living history of the members of our organization and stories of their professional experiences. Many of our members began in what is now called the golden age of radio and television, and this is an attempt to preserve as much as possible for succeeding generations. This recording is not intended for broadcast without first obtaining permission from Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. With me today in the CBS Studio Center in Studio City, California, is Edward Ted Ray. Edward is the given name, but Ted is the name you prefer, I assume?
Yes, that's correct. Well, it's old country. I mean, I always use the reference of Edward Kennedy.
Oh, yeah.
What do they call him? Teddy.
That's right.
And my mother named me Edward so she could name me Ted because she hated the name Theodore. So I've been fighting that my whole life.
So do we call you Ted or Teddy?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay.
I was Teddy when I was in grade school. Then when I became professional, I was Ted. Mm-hmm. But then when I was working on the big shows on headset, I became all one word, Teddy Ray.
Oh, Teddy Ray.
Yeah, because instead of Ted, Ned, Bob,
Yeah.
So they just started calling me Teddy Ray, all one word.
Because I had a favorite aunt who used to call me Jerry Mack. His middle name is Mack, M-A-C-K.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Teddy.
Well, just to go back, actually my middle name is Peter. My name is Edward Peter Ray.
Okay.
But I always say I have a Peter in the middle, but I never use it.
Okay, we know about that one. Okay, Edward Peter Ray. We start usually back at the beginning of time for you. Where were you born?
I was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Oh, you're a Canadian.
Well, I'm an American.
Uh-huh.
I was born in Toronto. My folks came down first time I was in Los Angeles was 1952. And then we just visited and went away for 3 years. Then I came back for 3 years. Came back in 1953 for 3 years. Then my mother wanted to go back to Toronto, and we were there for 3 years. Then we came back here in 1959, so I've been here continuously since 1959. Okay,
but so you were in Toronto and left permanently. What age?
I would do that at 18.
Oh, and so you did all your schooling and everything was in Toronto?
Yeah, thank God.
Okay.
Because I got an education. I was very pleased with that.
Okay, and what was that education like?
Well, I mean, it was very disciplined. I learned English and Latin and mathematics and...
French?
No, that's Montreal. I chose. I had a choice between Latin and French.
Uh-huh.
I went with Latin because I was raised in a family that was prejudiced against French Canadians. So, Of course, as a child, so was I.
Yeah.
It just kind of works out that way.
That's funny because my parents were Canadian, from Alberta and British Columbia.
Oh,
yeah. And my aunt, who lived in Cranbrook, BC, always talked about the Dogons. The French Canadians.
We called them frogs.
Frogs.
That's not for record.
Oh, be darned. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, what did you learn in school that particularly inspired you?
Well,
besides Latin.
I loved English and English grammar. I very much respect the English language, and it annoys me when people misuse it.
All the time.
All the time, and my dad was a credit manager for the largest publishing company in Canada, so I was very mathematically oriented.
Uh-huh.
So I had thought I was going to go into that line of business, but because my mother liked to move rather than pay rent, we came down here.
Was she employed?
No, she was never employed.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one sister, 6 years my senior.
Uh-huh.
So we really never had anything in common.
Right.
And she left to get married when I was 11, so I didn't really know her that well. And when I did get to know her, I didn't like her very much.
One of those relationships.
But when we came down here, my dad, we didn't have a lot of money, but my mom and dad would get tickets to television shows. And that's where I would sit in the audience and watch what was going on. And I said, I think this is for me. I'm fascinated by what's going on here. We'd go to the old Red Skelton show and
with our friend Art Gilmore doing the announcing.
I was too young to appreciate that. Excuse me for rattling the paper here for a second, but I just wanted to show you something.
What year was it when you arrived for your last time in
1559.
59? Oh, we've got tickets.
I have a collection of old tickets.
My gosh, you sure do.
Aren't they?
Dad is showing me a copy of Jack Benny program and the People's Choice.
You notice
Danny
also.
Thomas show.
You also notice on the tickets they always say such and such a product presents.
Yes.
It's when the show's had a
national sponsor.
Yeah.
In fact, they owned the show.
Yeah. But I'm a saver. I'm not a hoarder, but I'm a saver, and I've got a lot of memorabilia like that.
Oh, you sure do. How nice to save that. That's terrific. Very, very good. So you got a taste of television at an early age.
I got the bug, yeah. And again, what was the first thing I did? I started in the mailroom at KHJ.
KHJ, I'll be darned.
That would have been 1960, 61.
KHJ, that was Channel 9?
No, radio.
Oh, radio.
Well, they were both in the same building, but
okay.
Yes, it was both.
All right.
And I was, again, at the right place at the right time, and I guess I was very good at what I did. And the morning show at that time was Robert Q. Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And he was out from New York. And his producer died. And I was at the right place at the right time, and I became the producer of the Robert Q. Lewis morning radio show at the age of about, 22.
I was going to say, you were very young at that point.
I was very young and very naive.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but
he was in New York, you
No,
said?
he was here. He came out from New York because, as he said to me one day, he couldn't get arrested in New York.
Oh, really?
This was after his movies and all of his, What's My Line and all that. But I enjoyed it. I learned a lot from him, what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
But I worked for him for about 10 months, and
Great.
I'm proud to announce I never missed a day of work. And
Excellent.
in his letter of recommendation to me, he mentioned the loyalty I had for him.
And that was a daily show.
It was 5 days a week.
Yep.
From 6 to 9 at that time, I think. Not 6 to 10. But my memory may not help there.
What were the duties of a producer in those days?
I programmed the music. I took care of the log. I kept track of the commercials and wrote down when the commercial started, when it stopped, to make sure that they got their full minute, because a lot of them were live. He was doing them live. And it was fun because going back to my dad, he was very methodical, and I picked that up from him, so I was very good at what I did.
Uh-huh.
And I was actually working 7 days a week. I would work 5 days on the Robert Q. Lewis show, and on Saturday I would do locations with Engineer Bill.
Oh, really?
He would do 3 supermarkets every Saturday, and I would go ahead and set up the shopping carts so that the kids could see them. And then once I got that done, I moved on to the next location. And then on Sundays, I worked in the newsroom pulling copy for the guys on the air. So I just worked 7 days a week, and I enjoyed every single second of it.
At that point, you were still a radio employee?
Well, I was an employee of RKO General, which was both radio and television. But all of my work was done for radio.
Yes.
And the TV studios were just on the other side of the hall.
Yeah. Now, Robert Q. Lewis, as I recall, had a reputation for not being an easy guy to work for.
That's an accurate description, yes. Yeah. He was just very headstrong, and it didn't bother me at the time because that's who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd get tested at times, but it was okay.
Well, sure. That's part of the persona.
And it was my job to not let it bother me.
And it didn't.
No. And as I said, we had a playlist, of course. A, B, and C. A was up-tempo, B was ballad, and C was right in the middle somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I had to program the morning. And he went along with that, pretty much. I do remember, though, that it was back in the day when you never put back-to-back commercials in a commercial break, for instance, 2 different cigarettes or 2 different cars.
Yeah.
You had to separate them. And I remember one day that he got upset with me because we got near the end and I realized I had 2 cigarette commercials left and they had to go in the same commercial break.
Oh, dear.
And, but those things happen.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
So I did that for about 10 months, and after that, I left radio. I got married, and I wanted stability, so I went to what was then Pacific Telephone and Telegraph in Pasadena, and I became a telephone installer.
Oh,
yeah.
That was a big business in those days.
It was, but I didn't like crawling under houses or climbing up poles.
I can imagine.
So I didn't last long there, and then I became a private investigator for what is now known as Equifax. It was known then as a retail credit company. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a couple of years, and didn't care for that too much, ratting on people,
No.
going out and seeing if they qualify for insurance and all.
Right.
But it was a living.
Tell me about getting married. How did you meet? And
I literally married the girl next door.
did you?
In Alhambra. She lived next door to me, and I remember how I proposed to her. I said, we could work things out if you play your cards right. That was my proposal.
And she played her cards right.
Well, the marriage only lasted 5 years because we were both too young. And I was not only young but immature. But to this day, I will never say a bad word about her. She was a wonderful person. Mm-hmm. And even after we were divorced and she got remarried, I was invited over to the house for dinner. I mean, yeah, it was a very amicable separation.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Great.
While I was married, I joined the Air National Guard.
Ah, okay.
So
did I.
Went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio,
Texas.
Then I did 33 weeks in Wichita Falls, Texas, which was 30 weeks too long. Lived through a tornado there.
Did you?
Yeah. And then came back here, and there's a bit of a hazy part of this. When I came back, when I was in the Air National Guard, there were a couple of people there who were involved with Q cards. And it was a company called Q Cards Incorporated, and they said, "Why don't you come over and work for us?"
In Wichita Falls?
No, back here in Van Nuys.
Oh, in Van Nuys.
Back here on the coast.
Okay.
And I went over there, and I worked for Q Cards for several years, which of course gives you a wonderful experience for knowing what goes on stage.
Yes.
Where to be and where not to be. And
did you actually physically write up the Q cards?
I printed them and held them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you have a good hand, steady hand?
Well, I learned how to print, and to this day, I still print as though I were printing cue cards.
Do you really?
I still have that. I haven't lost it. And while I was doing that, they got an account in Nashville, Tennessee, called Hee Haw. Mm-hmm. And I went down to Nashville, and Hee Haw, of course, as you know, was produced by Sam Lavelle.
Indeed.
And the Directors Guild got on them about not having a guild stage manager. So again, I was at the right place at the right time. Uh-huh. I became the official stage manager on paper, even though I was still doing cue cards. Well, then...
You were a member of the guild?
Yes.
Yes.
And the cue cards went away, and I became their full-time stage manager.
For heaven's sake.
But I left after 6 years because I figured, how long can this go on?
Yeah.
The show ran 25 years. And I'm sure if I had stayed, I wouldn't be surprised if I had ended up directing it.
Probably so.
Yeah. But came back here, and I did cue cards on the Smothers Brothers show and on the very short-lived Judy Garland show.
Oh, yes.
And I worked on the award shows, but the award shows were after I was in the guild. So I worked on the award shows as a stage manager. I did every single award show that you can think of, except the Tonys, because I never worked in New York.
Oh,
but I I mean, literally, little award shows like that, and the Oscars, the Emmys, the Grammys, and I loved live television. That was my because I kind of liked the fact that with live television, you went on the air, you didn't stop. If anything went wrong, you kept going, and that kept you alert.
Sure.
I loved those years, as it were.
I'm always amazed that they still use cue cards when teleprompters are available.
Well, that was back then.
I know.
You're right, cue cards.
But now, Saturday Night Live still uses cue cards. But I guess because they make so many changes at the last minute.
And also for crosstalk.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's true.
Normally the prompter is for directly into camera. And the crosstalk will be cue cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the Oscar shows, it's all electronic now.
Is it?
Yeah, like Oscars, Grammys.
Yeah.
It's all electronic.
Were you involved with the electronic versions?
No, that came along after I wasn't doing it anymore.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was involved in it as a stage manager, but
Right.
not as a cue card guy.
Well, stage manager has a lot of responsibility,
Yes.
and it's really a pretty thankless job because it's not very well recognized.
Well, actually, I guess, I don't know, I guess I was good with people.
Mm-hmm.
And, in fact, just recently I ran into somebody in a restaurant who remembered me and wanted to have my picture taken. He was a IA 33 guy, and he and his brother remembered me fondly, and they said they just always enjoyed working with me. And that's kind of a nice feeling.
Nice.
It's nice after all these years.
Sure.
I didn't recognize him, but he recognized me, and I was very flattered by that.
I'm sure you were.
Yeah.
That's very nice. So, cue cards, and then what?
Well, Directors Guild awards, and that was the rest of my career. Just doing all the shows. I did years 7, 8, and 9 of All in the Family.
Oh, did you?
All in the Family was my very first sitcom, and I thought to myself, I'm starting at the top. Where do I go from here?
Yeah, exactly.
But that was a great learning experience. I also did WKRP in Cincinnati, right here on this lot.
Ah, how good yeah. The CBS Studio Center.
Yeah, CBS Radford, as we like to call it.
Yeah, right.
And then I did a gazillion pilots that some worked, some didn't.
Well, tell me about working on All in the Family. That show was so iconic. At the time it was being done, though, it was just another sitcom, except it was getting very high ratings.
Well, it was a groundbreaker because of the subject matter.
Yes.
I mean, everybody everybody's family had an Archie Bunker.
Sure.
And they broke. I mean, normally they broke so much ground because a lot of what went on that show had never been on television before.
Mm-hmm.
But I would work, only 3 days a week. I'd work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesday was rehearsal hall. Thursday was camera blocking. And Friday we would do 2 shows, dress rehearsal and a live show.
Would you do all the cue cards for the...
No, this is as a stage manager.
Oh, stage manager.
Cue cards are long gone.
All right.
But what I loved was on rehearsal day and on blocking day, we'd go into Carol's dressing room, Carol and Rob. What's her name? Edith Bunker.
I'm going to say Stapleton, but that's not
Gene
right.
Stapleton, yes.
Stapleton.
Anyway, and the director, those 4 people, the director and I, would be in Carol's dressing room just talking over material. And that was an education because I watched how they would make something that was funny even funnier.
Mm.
So I learned about comedy there.
So they worked together to...
Oh, very much together, yeah.
Was it in the reading of the line or in changing the line?
No, this is after we'd been on our feet. And part of it was changing of the line. Or if we reconstruct this, if we put these words here, it's funnier.
Mm.
And they were always right.
Yeah.
I remember Rob telling us, he said, you never have a punchline and then have more words after it.
Ah.
The punchline has always got to be the last thing you say.
Sure.
And it's so true.
Absolutely.
And I enjoyed doing that a lot. And hope this doesn't get out, but I made $100 a day, so I was making $300 a week doing All in the Family.
Wow.
I know. This would have been 1977, maybe, 78.
Well,
And it was after All in the Family I went over to WKRP.
$100 a week was a pretty good salary in those days.
100 a day.
A day.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. That's even better.
Yeah. But, I mean, in this day and age, or as I got on in the Guild, you wouldn't work for $300 a day.
No. Was the staff, the cast rather, of All in the Family cohesive? Or
Absolutely.
No animosity amongst
Never, ever saw anything ever.
Very strong people there.
Yeah, but they all respected each other. Mm-hmm. And that's a key right there.
Right.
And they worked as a family, no pun intended.
And Norman Lear, I'm guessing, is a very nice guy to work for.
He is. He's a tough taskmaster.
Is he?
But he was always generally, he did the warm-up for the audience.
Did he?
Yeah. I mean, he was one of the guys.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. I respected him very much.
And WKRP was a fun show.
It was. There were some, I won't say animosities, but it wasn't the cohesive show that All in the Family was.
Ah.
But at the same time, they still worked well together.
Some people from that show sort of disappeared.
Gary Sandy. Well, Gary's doing roadshow.
Is he?
Yeah, he's doing Broadway, off Broadway, whatever. He's doing roadshows. In fact, he just did something with I Dream of Jeannie. What's her name?
Oh, I know.
Yeah, Barbara Eden.
Eden.
Yeah, they just did a show in Kansas City together. So he's still working.
Okay.
But the one thing I remember about Gary Sandy, he was never late getting on the set. But he was always late arriving at the studio, and he came up with the most creative reasons for not being there on time.
Really?
I mean, there was always, but you had to laugh because when you were ready to go, he was ready to go.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get angry at him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, where's Gary? He'll be here. And he was. He showed up.
Showed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was all that was important.
Yeah.
Some of the other people on the show, I can't remember their names. I can see them, but I can't say their names.
I know I can see them too, and that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were stage manager for that show
Yes,
as well.
I was, yeah.
Excellent.
I just did the last year and a half. But it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot. And working here was great because I could leave home and be here in my parking spot in 5 minutes.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, that was the good part of it. And I don't know why it happened, but for whatever reason, I got a parking spot right outside the stage door.
Aren't you lucky?
I'm very lucky. And people would say, how'd you get that? I don't know. They just told me to park there.
Great.
So I was very fortunate.
Well, I live in Thousand Oaks, and it takes me 35 minutes to get here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have a friend who lives in Altadena, and he works at Sony in Culver City. I wouldn't want to make that drive.
No, that's... Wow.
That would be a killer.
A real killer. So your last job then in television was what?
Well, I did the Kennedy Center honors for 9 years.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Working for George Stevens.
Yes. Well, yes. There were several. It moved on, yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a classy show. I'd go to Washington the first weekend in December every year. And, of course, it's wintertime, right?
Sure.
So one year I went there, and I took all my winter clothes, and it was 74 degrees all weekend.
Oh, no.
And I didn't know what to wear.
Oh, yes. So you get to work with our good friend Ray Charles.
Oh, God, yeah. He was also a wonderful person. He was one of the guys, because when we'd leave the hotel in the morning and we'd get on our van to go to the airport, he was right there. So, he had no special limo to take him to the airport. He got on the van with us.
Good.
I respected him very much for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice man.
I miss him.
Yeah,
I was saddened to hear that he left us, yeah.
Yeah, but he lived a long, useful life.
He did, indeed, yeah. I'm trying to think.
Did you ever marry again?
No, I never did.
Never did.
Never did.
Really?
I had a couple of 5-year relationships,
Uh-huh.
but never married.
Okay.
For whatever reason. I don't know.
So you remained footloose and fancy-free, as
Well,
they say?
that one 5-year commitment, it was a commitment.
Yeah.
I wasn't messing around on her at all.
Yeah.
But I don't know why we didn't get married. It's a funny question, Jerry. We just didn't.
So no offspring to...
No, I have no children.
To call you daddy or granddaddy?
No.
Yeah.
I did, however, I was a member of the Big Brother program.
Oh, that's a good...
And I was with a young man from from when he was 8 years old until he was 21, 22. And I helped, his mother was not one of the greatest people in the world. I think she slept with everybody in the valley except me. And they were going to put him in a foster home. And I said, no, you're not. He's coming to live with me.
Uh-huh.
So he came and lived with me, and I put him into Van Nuys High School. And so he was kind of my son.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful organization to become involved with.
It is. It was very rewarding for me.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And then
And you make such a difference in the young person's life.
Well, I like to think I tried to, you know.
Yeah.
I did the best I could.
Sure.
But then he got to a point where it was time he felt he had to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And so he moved on. He was a very troubled young man, and I wasn't equipped to deal with all of his troubles, but as I said, best I can say is I did what I thought was best.
What you thought was best.
Yeah.
Good.
He ended up committing suicide.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Too bad.
I know. And to this day, I think, what could I have done to prevent that?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Not a thing.
He was a very troubled young man. He had tried suicide a couple of times before, but we caught him, and
it's a shame.
it is a shame because I loved the young man, that kid,
Yeah.
like he was my son.
Gosh.
Yeah. Brings up old, not pleasant memories.
Your training in school in English and learning how to write well certainly came to be very handy, I would think, in your cue card business.
Well, it's a different kind of writing.
I know.
I mean, I learned to write in Canada. They would take a ruler and see if your H's were straight and all your letters were...
Really?
Oh, yeah, they were...
Cursive?
And they'd crack you on the knuckles with
Uh-uh.
it. So I learned my handwriting is outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as much anymore. But I learned to respect, as I said earlier, learned to respect the language.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, I have a very, very dark sense of humor. People have compared me with Robin Williams.
Oh.
A lot of people, when I'm sitting around, say, you're just like Robin Williams. And I think, well, it's a compliment.
It's a compliment?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. But you could give me a blank piece of paper and I can't sit down and write. But I can edit. I can look at something and see how to make it better.
That's a good...
Do you follow me?
Yes. Well, Teddy, we've covered some territory here. And do we have anything to wrap us up?
I don't know. I'm trying to think, because I know when I get in my car, I'm going to think, oh, damn it, why didn't I mention that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's... I'm trying to think. As I told you earlier, I'm not one who talks about myself, but I've worked with some of the biggest people in the world. I mean, I can tell anecdotes about when I was doing cue cards. I was on the set with John Wayne, and it was just the two of us.
Yes.
So, and I've sat on the edge of a stage with both Jane Fonda and Jimmy Stewart, and at the time though, sometimes you don't realize who you're with.
That's right.
You know, after the fact, now years later, I'm thinking, I was sitting there with Jimmy Stewart. And he told me an interesting anecdote. He said, and I was very attentive, and he let me know that he appreciated that. He said, I remember coming into a stage one day, and the first AD didn't even acknowledge I was there. And he said, and I remembered that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he was very observant.
I'll bet.
Yeah. But another anecdote, if you want.
Yes.
I was doing the Emmys with Marlo Thomas. Well, I had heard that she was not a pleasant person.
Yes,
She
I've heard
was
that.
very difficult to work with. So she was sitting in the audience, and I went down, and I thought, because it's my sense of humor, I kneeled next to her, and I said, Marlo, I said, you know that story about not shooting the messenger? She said, yeah. I said, and then I said, well, we're being delayed. After that show, I got a handwritten note from her thanking me for how much help I was on the show.
Really?
So I think it's a matter of how you approach people.
It could very well be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, there are people who everybody says, oh, they're so easy to work with. And I found them to be a pain in the ass.
Sure. Sure.
Harvey Korman was one of them.
Oh, I'll bet.
I know, isn't that?
Yeah.
Well, because he was doing a pilot, so he had a lot at stake.
Mm.
So he was edgy.
Yeah.
Same with McLean Stevenson.
Mm-hmm.
He was not pleasant to work with.
Yeah.
But I try to remember only the good people.
That's, you worked on the Judy Garland show. Now
That was Cue Cards, yeah.
She's a legend, and she's supposedly very hard to work with.
Yeah, well, it was. I remember we came in to do the show one day, and we printed up the cards, and they said, "Well, I'm not doing the show." And how come? Oh, Judy went to London.
Wow.
She just upped and went to London.
Well,
she was very. But it was again being in a room with an icon.
Sure.
Yeah.
At that point in my life where she was very, very popular with a certain segment of the audience, I liked her. Most of my contemporaries couldn't stand her.
Yeah. Well, she was incredibly talented. She was just screwed up.
Yeah. She had an aura about her that was very appealing, and yet it was a rough, tough thing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I worked with Liza on a show called Baryshnikov on Broadway, and she was terrific.
I see.
But then apparently she took the same road that Judy took and
Yeah.
just got involved in drugs, and she
Yeah.
messed herself up.
What a shame.
It is a shame, yeah. Yeah.
They're both so talented.
Yeah.
Well, Teddy, thank you so much for
All right.
joining us today for your little audio history here.
I hope I gave you something to work with.
We did indeed. I'm talking with Edward Ted Ray, or
The only time I ever went by Edward, well, it's on all my, my tax forms and all.
yeah,
But if I was called Edward Peter at home, I knew I was in trouble.
in trouble. Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Edward Peter, and I was in trouble. But I've always been known as Ted.
Ted Ray, Teddy Ray,
Teddy Ray.
Teddy Ray, Teddy Ray. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, this has been recorded on October the 26th in the year 2015.
Yeah.
And this is Jerry Fry. I'm the audio historian for Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. Thanking you very much for listening.